This video continues from the previous video. Okay, so they had more goals. They had a functional goal, an accessible goal, a cost-effective goal. And they decided very early on that there were certain things that they had to have. For instance, they wanted indoor plumbing with hot showers. They wanted a kitchen with modern appliances. And so they wanted to figure out how they could have these things and still stay on grid. They wanted their goal was to make the house accessible, and that open layout plan that we had talked about when we were talking about prairie style is part of their function. They had cost, wanted to be cost effective, which, like it or not, is always a goal. Even your clients that say money's no object, and I don't think I ever had one of those, they still have. Aesthetic goal. They wanted the home not just to be energy efficient, but it's a rural Vermont landscape. They wanted to take cues from the local agricultural context. And you can see this is a 200-year-old farmhouse. And they wanted to maintain that vernacular. And by vernacular we mean the style in which the local style in which the majority of the buildings are built. And so they used 2.5-inch clapboard on the outside of the body, metal. They fused conventional Vermont vernacular forms and materials with modern style. And they did do that. The interior was designed for a clean, minimal aesthetic, allowing focus to the carefully framed views out of the landscape. And I'll show you some of those in a minute. So the goal was to keep it simple, which does save on cost. I would have gone in and added some gingerbread, but yeah, I like a little bit of gingerbread. But it's not my house. Right. So they had a historic preservation goal. So they moved the building that was there. They wanted to live off the land, which they did. Let's see. So the home has reached net zero distinction through the design and construction of an ultra-efficient shell with low energy budget, which was then supplemented with that wind turbine. So they relied on solar, wind, and they did pull some energy out of the ground. Comparing our use to the average energy use of a home in the Northeast is enlightening. Our home uses just under 6,000 kilowatts per hour compared to, 33,757 kilowatts per hour for the average home in the Northeast. So by doing all these things, and they did it for a reasonable budget. I mean, that budget was pretty good. I mean, building this house that large for that budget, that's pretty cheap, especially for Vermont. So, look at that. I mean, that's awesome. It's just a fraction. It's like not quite a sixth, between a fifth and a sixth of what the average home uses. That's pretty major. It's impressive. So that's why they won some awards for this. Heating a home in the cloudy, cold northern climate was the biggest design challenge. And so what they did was a lot of out of the box thinking. And as we talked about, they turned the house into a styrofoam cooler. And then they had to, scale it properly and make sure they had windows and doors, of course. But then they wanted to make sure they were using the high energy windows. There's a software called Energy 10, and they use that to help them create passive solar and thermal massing, helped with the envelope design, the glazing, air tightness, mechanical systems, lighting, and appliances. So there is software out there now that can help you. And then they created a spreadsheet, gave them the information, gave them some options, and they got to choose what they wanted to go with from there. So that really saved you a lot of time. Because you imagine all the research you have to do if you had not done one of these before. So he says, while this process can only be described in a linear manner on paper, to synergize all of the factors described above, plans and elevations were worked simultaneously. That is the thing that we talk about. Form does not always follow function. They have to evolve and they have to work together. To achieve net zero energy usage requires a very tight energy budget, which was made possible by using the natural resources in the site, the sun, the earth, and the wind. Right? That's another reason for doing your site analysis, so you can see what's out there. Using the passive energy of the sun was the first approach, as the sun's energy is free when you orient your house properly. It's the best part of the sun. Now, obviously, the equipment to harness it is not free. In fact, it's expensive, but it's no longer unaffordable. It's come down in price every year. So the first and the second floor footprints are stacked for efficiency, and the interior plans are open for flexibility and universal, and also for universal design. This is a universal design house, very open. And it's very minimal. So what they wanted, and you can see here in these images, when you look out the windows, that's the goal, not the house. I would seriously have to paint some color in there at least. That's me. I mean, I'm happy for them. They did it. They did a good job. I just look at it and think I have to be painting something. All right. So the open plan maximizes thermal mass and daylighting. And you can see you don't need turn on a single light during the day in that house because of the open plan, allowing light to come in from every side all at the same time. So you end up with a very brightly lit space. And that's another thing with the walls being painted light colored, that helps contribute to bouncing around your daylight. Nobody has to go into a room and turn on a light. They did use conventionally wood stick frame, 2x6 studs, 2 feet on center, and the walls were laid out in 2-foot increments. Then they used the closed cell polyurethane foam, which we were referring to like styrofoam, to completely fill the cavity of the frame, and 1 inch of rigid foam board was wrapped around the outside to cut off any potential thermal bridges. And that just means, anything that could be either a heat gain or heat flow. That's a bridge is the direction it moves. The entire wall assembly has an R value of 40. Although more expensive, the cost was minimal to the benefit. Yeah, okay, so R value of 40 is huge. It's very high. So what they save in heating, of course, they are not bringing in anything, but they're not producing it. So the benefit is they're not polluting as much because they're retaining their indoor air. They used a 4-inch thick slab. Not a lot of basements in Vermont necessarily because of the thaw and the freeze that can cause bedrock or rock walls in the basement to crack. So they just did a slab on grade. We don't do a lot of those in the South. We mostly do crawl spaces. But here they did a concrete slab. They used thermal. They absorbed the sun through triple pane, low E argon filled fiberglass windows. Now, the only negative of argon filled fiberglass is if the argon escapes into the environment. It's one of the worst gases you could put in the environment. Okay, and so what happens is the sun is going to hit these windows, and because of all those 3 panes of glass with those gaps in there, there's going to be very little transmitted. Most of it's going to be reflected. And this just kind of goes through what all the different values are, numbers are. Look how low that is. Okay, and so they also drew heat from the temperature in the earth to produce hot water. You can use you can dig deep down, and create a radiant water system just based on the heat coming out of the earth. And it's free. Well, obviously, the system's not free, as we keep saying, but it itself is. And then here's a wall section, so you can see the wall section. Triple glazed windows. This was their foundation. So his advice was to spend as much of the budget as possible on the shell. He said the house was fastidiously caulked to seal the envelope. Now, in order to keep them from asphyxiating from carbon dioxide, because they sealed it off so well, you have to have one of these. It is called a heat recovery ventilator. And it just makes sure that in the winter you have proper ventilation and your CO2 levels are not deadly. That's him. The guy who wrote the blog about his house. I feel bad. I forgot his name. David Pill. I keep wanting to call him Tim Pitts. I have no idea why. David Pill. That's David Pill. Sorry, David. I'm sure you're not saying this. But to create the most efficient solution possible, a diverse collaborative team was pulled together during the conceptual design phase. He brought in a contractor in the beginning. And I'm going to tell you guys, this is one of the biggest pieces of advice I get from people in industry all the time. And I don't, I don't practice anymore, but as a former practicing architect, the sooner you bring in that contractor, the better. Because they build houses. They're going to help you make decisions, wise decisions, and help you fix things that, maybe didn't get right. So he said there were definitely trade-offs and compromises, but it was a balanced process where the elements which were taken from one area ended up benefiting another. The integrated holistic approach was the key to the project's success. And this talks about some of the things that they did, who he hired, and what they did. So his consultants that he included, he used the software that he used, the construction activities, meaning, just how it was constructed and what means and methods they used, their operations, post-occupancy evaluation activities. So basically, what he's saying is post-occupancy is after you've lived in it. From the experience of living in this house with our children, I have learned that we absolutely can repattern ourselves to live within a framework of extreme energy efficient consciousness without feeling compromised. This home is a model for a new paradigm, a new normal way of living. And he's right. It's just now about learning how to do this. And one of the reasons we're looking at this, and specifically a house in Vermont, if he can do this in Vermont, we can do this anywhere. Okay, and he talks a little bit more about the systems. We talked about them here and there. And so this is what they ended up achieving, how much they use. They use, just under 600 kilowatt hours, but all of that is produced from sun, wind, and earth. No gas, no oil, no biomass, no other fuel. That's it. That's their grand total right there. Okay, and so this is the annual energy use by end use, meaning how much heat do they use, how much hot water, and so this is how much they use and how much they generate. So you can see this is how much they use and this is how much they create. Okay, and so they use their power bill to come up with these numbers. And then we talked about how the layout of the indoors, because it's narrow, you have cross ventilation to cool in the summer, so they don't have air conditioning. You wouldn't need it in Vermont. And then here's just some lessons that they learned, ratings they received, and awards that they won for this house. An important lesson learned was to find the path of least resistance by using common sense and reducing the complications of multiple systems. Additionally, I learned how to take what may seem like a compromise and evolve successful relationships between the dynamic forces acting on a project. Okay, so case study. So you see one, see how it looks. Now we're going to talk about the parts and pieces. And this ends here.